Hi guys, today I wanted to talk about something that's really important in TCG design, and that's the card template. I'm going to be going over the current card template that I use for my TCG, as well as explaining some things that I feel are important for having a well laid out template for any game. Here's a pretty good example of a current GoblinBlitz monster card. I want to start by talking about probably one of the most important aspects of any TCG template, and that's the card's cost. I have mine pretty big in the top left corner right here, and I would highly recommend having your card's cost somewhere on the left side, ideally in the top corner, because that's where it's going to be most visible when you're fanning out your hands and looking at your cards. A card's cost is pretty much the most important piece of information that players need to consider when they're looking at their hands, because they're going to be trying to evaluate which cards to play at the right time. So it's really important that the cost of each card is clearly visible so that they can know which cards they have available to them on each turn. Moving on from that, we have the title. This tells you what the card's name is, which is why most TCGs tend to put it front and center on the card. I tried to keep the text pretty big on mine because you want it to be readable, but you could honestly make an argument for using smaller text because it's not going to be the most important thing to look at when the card is on the board. For the actual look of the text, right now I'm just using a bold all caps font to try and make it as easily readable from a distance as possible, but I'm also kind of limited in what I can use because Canva doesn't have that many options for fonts. But when I do update this template in a more advanced software, I'm definitely going to be looking for a slightly more unique font, but I'm still going to try and keep it easy to read. You see this in a lot of TCGs where the font becomes almost synonymous with the game, like in Magic. Next up, we have the card stats. Now, this is of course going to be different depending on how your game is set up, but for me, my monsters have two main stats, which are strength and HP. I decided not to put any sort of label next to the numbers, because I felt like that would unnecessarily clutter up the card frame, but I suppose it could be helpful for allowing your opponent to more easily read your card stats without having to turn the card around. So that is something to consider when designing your game. I decided to put the stats in the right corner, because they're not as relevant in your hands, so it's okay that they'll be partially obscured when you haven't played them yet. As for the art, I decided to go with this semi-full art design. I thought it would be cool to show off as much of the artwork as possible, even if the bottom half is going to be partially obscured by the text. A lot of major TCGs have done this, but it's usually reserved for extra rare or alt art treatments, not the base version of a card. But since I'm an independent creator, I'm not going to have as much time to make multiple versions of each card, so I thought I might as well make the regular one look as good as possible. Moving down to the type line, I went with a pretty classic two-part design. The first section indicates the monster's general type, for example Goblin, and the second section gives a more specific description of that monster's allegiance or role, in this case a regime mage. The reason my monster cards don't say monster as part of the type line is that they come from a completely separate deck as the tactics, and in the future there will be different card backs for both of the types, so it's not really necessary to include that information in the type line. If you're making a TCG where that's not the case, then it might be useful to have the monster's card type in the actual type line. The number on the right side of the type line is technically the monster's rarity, but it also functions as a limit on how many copies of it you can have in your deck. For example, a 4 indicates a common, and it means that you can have up to 4 of that card in your deck. A 3 is an uncommon, a 2 for a rare, and a 1 means the card is a legendary. The idea with this system is that there's still some element of rarity to make opening packs fun, but players hopefully won't have to spend tons of money on the game to try and get a full set of rares that they need for a deck. The issue of rarities in trade card games is something that I actually find really interesting, so I might honestly make a whole video talking about it at some point, but this is the gist of the system I'm using for now. In the middle of the card, we've got the main text box. This is where any of a monster's abilities or special actions will be listed, and for tactics, it's where the card's main effect is. There's nothing crazy here. It's become pretty standard in TCG design to have the card's main text box in the bottom middle, because that's usually just where you have the most open space on the card. But let me know in the comments if you have a different way of laying out your card's abilities, because I'd love to hear if you've come up with any interesting ideas for another way that this could be laid out. Another thing I like to have in the main text box is flavor text. It's not an essential aspect of your card template, but I honestly just have a lot of fun writing them, and I think it's a cool way to develop the story of your TCG. Finally, we've got to my favorite part of the GoblinBlitz card template, and that's the range box. This isn't something that's part of the generic TCG card template, but when you're making your own game, you're probably going to have at least one aspect of it that doesn't quite fit in the typical template, and you're going to have to find a place to squeeze it in. For the range box, I decided it looked best on the bottom left, because it only really matters on the battlefield. Since the GoblinBlitz battlefield is a board, this box indicates which spaces a monster can attack, and it's another way of allowing me to make each monster feel like it has a unique playstyle. For example, 2 cards from my playtest decks are Boneblade Swordsman and Vicious Lancer. They seem like almost the same card at first, because they have the same cost and very similar stats. In practice though, they have pretty different playstyles, because one of them deals slightly more damage, while the other can reach more spaces with its diagonal range. The horn symbol indicates the monster, and the targets show which spaces it can attack in relation to where it is on the board. I might have to make some adjustments to the range box, because right now it can be a bit hard for your opponents to see and keep track of which spaces your monsters can reach, since it's so small. But I also feel like it would be kind of hard to fix that without having it eat up too much space on the card. I don't know, maybe I'll make a video about that one in the future, but that's it for now. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.